Why do survivors of brain injury experience irritability? I'm going to take you through 3 different areas to help you to understand why this occurs. The first area is understanding the neurological changes that occur in the brain. So by neurology, we mean the brain. The brain is made up of nerve cells called neurons. And these neurons connect together in many different connections to create pathways. And electrical signals are sent through these pathways, and that is the brain's activity. That's the brain communicating with itself, understanding the outside world, processing information. And in this video, you can see this is a real-time scan model of the brain's activity. And all of those areas that are lighting up are showing where the activity is. It's those electrical signals. So you can see there's a huge amount of connectivity within the brain. As it communicates with itself, it's constantly communicating with other parts of itself and transferring information, making sense of the world around you. There are 86 billion neurons in the brain and 100 trillion connections. So it really is incredibly busy. Now, from that point of view, if you imagine an area of damage to one particular part, the consequences, it's not just the task that part of the brain is responsible for that might be affected. Say it's a part of the brain that affects memory, manages memory. It's actually the connections that area has to other brain areas that will also be affected. There's a disruption of that network. Now, why is this relevant in irritability? There are 2 parts of the brain to understand when we think about irritability. The first one is the amygdala. There are 2 amygdala. They are either side of the brain, and they are in a part of the brain called the limbic system, which is responsible for our emotions. And the amygdala itself is responsible for detecting the emotions of anger, fear, sadness, and aggression. And it is in constant contact, constant communication with another part of the brain called the frontal lobes. And there's a significant area of connectivity there. They're constantly talking to each other. Now, what the amygdala does is it recognises threat. It's like your early warning system. It detects something's not right here. I feel uncomfortable. Something's not okay. We might not be safe. And that information then is communicated to the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes are a bit like your detective. They check out the information, survey the area, work it out, and decide, is this a threat or are we okay? And then the job of the frontal lobes is to communicate that back to the amygdala and say, no, do you know what? Everything's all right. We're okay here. We're safe. Sometimes it can be helpful to think of that as your emotional mind and your wise mind. Now, we need both to function as effective human beings. We need our emotional mind, we need our emotional intelligence, but we also need the moderating influence of our wise mind. Now, the problem following a brain injury is if those connections are less efficient or slowed down, then those 2 brain areas aren't communicating as effectively as they could. And so when the amygdala detects threat, it's lacking the moderating influence of the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes, the wise mind, hasn't quite kicked in, and we experience an emotional reaction that maybe if our frontal lobes were able to communicate with the amygdala, we wouldn't have experienced with such intensity with the outcomes that occur. Now, what happens then is, given a bit of time and a bit of processing ability, the wise mind kicks in and recognises that perhaps the response was excessive to the situation. And that's what we would call irritability. The response of the individual is a little bit beyond what was needed for that particular situation. And what can follow then is feelings of guilt and remorse afterwards, as that person processes what's happened and recognises that given the opportunity to do it again, they may not have reacted in that way. Other symptoms that can come along with this, you may have heard of impulsivity or disinhibition. And that's a very similar process to the process of irritability, that we are responding from our emotional mind before the wise mind has had an opportunity to kick in. And it's because of a slowing down and inefficiency in this amygdala frontal lobe circuit.